Okay, thank you all for coming. And we have a lot of speakers because we have a lot of people involved in coming up with our bill on competition. And so the order, I'm going to give the order here and we're going to stick to it. The order, and I don't have my opening remarks, press people.
Right here.
Okay, now I have them. Would you like to make a copy of them?
I was trying to intercept that.
Okay. The order of the speakers are Schumer, Murray, Stabenow, Wyden, Reed, Carper, Menendez, Cardin, Shaheen, Merkley, Coons, Murphy, Peters. We're not going to deviate from that order. Everyone's going to try to be brief. Well, we want to thank you all for coming. The Senate did some great and historic work last Congress, building an incredible foundation, not just to compete with the Chinese government, but to enhance America's global leadership in the 21st century. From the CHIPS and Science Bill and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill to last year's omnibus and everything in between, we laid a strong foundation for the future. But we all know that despite that strong progress, our work is not done. We will work in a bipartisan fashion. I've asked each of these chairs to reach out to their ranking members to come up with bipartisan legislation to deal with the Chinese government, and we're having great interest, I would say, from our Republican colleagues. And we're going to do it like we will work in the bipartisan fashion, like we modeled with CHIPS and Science, to continue to boost our national security and compete and counter the Chinese government's role throughout the world. So today, we are announcing a new initiative, one that will build on this momentum and develop new and significant bipartisan legislation that includes hearings, markups, working directly together with our Republican colleagues to build and move legislation. In recent weeks, I have met with and tasked a number of our chairs, many of them are here today, to reach out to their ranking members and other Republicans and begin working to deliver packages of bipartisan legislation, which we will combine into one large Chinese government competition bill in coming months. We have 5 key areas we are focusing on. First, limiting the flow of advanced technology to the Chinese government. We will work to halt the Chinese government's development of advanced technologies that we know will shape the course of this century. We need to build on the kinds of actions like the Biden administration's export control rule to block the flow of chip tooling technology to China. I've asked Chairs Brown and Menendez to look at authorities in their respective jurisdictions to strengthen export control laws and identify new sanctions that may be needed and counter Chinese government coercion. 2, we want to limit the flow of investment to the Chinese government. It's incumbent on us to ensure that the U.S. is not the financial lifeblood supporting the Chinese government and its military technological advancement. We must make sure that we can prevent the Chinese government from using our own free society to acquire and even steal U.S. innovations and critical technologies. This means giving the Secretaries of Treasury and Commerce new authorities to screen and, where appropriate, halt the flow of capital to China's high-tech industries. Senators Casey and Cornyn have a strong bipartisan bill here that will help. I've talked to Senator Cornyn. He's very interested in working with us on this. 3, domestic economic investments. We all know that it's critical to invest in the industries of the future here in America. CHIPS and Science and the IRA are already creating vital investments across our country. But to ensure these gains are felt by American families and not outsourced to benefit foreign entities and fully fund the science investment from last year's bipartisan bill, we have to move further. We need our chairs to keep identifying critical vulnerabilities, including assistance for small business, and, very important, building a workforce for the future. We need also to further strengthen the CFIUS process. Senators Peters, Cantwell, Murray, Cardin, and Warner are already doing good work here. 4, economic ally and partner alignment. It's vital that the United States provide a stark and credible alternative to the Chinese government's so-called Belt and Road Initiative. seeking to expand their influence around the globe. We have allies and partners who stand ready and willing to work with us to provide a positive alternative to China that actually benefits those countries looking for a helping hand. And now is the time for us to harness those potential alternatives. And finally, security, ally, and partner alignment. We must continue to deter the Chinese government from any conflict with Taiwan. Chairs Menendez, Warner, Murray, and Reid have worked on this. Last year, Chairman Menendez and Ranking Member Risch had good proposals. They didn't make it into legislation, but that's a good basis for us to work in this area. So, bottom line, time's not on our side. The Xi regime is working every day to catch up and surpass the United States. There is no reason our two parties here in the Congress and in the Senate can't come together and send a strong message to the Chinese government that we're united in this pressing national security effort, and we are committed to maintaining America's lead in the future. Senator Murray.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. It is no secret that our competitors on the world stage, including the Chinese government, are doing everything they can to get ahead and outcompete us. As I've been saying in just about every appropriations hearing, and I've been to more than 20 already, staying ahead in the global economy, including with the Chinese government, requires that we make critical investments we need to stay competitive and secure across our government. House Republicans are threatening to throw in the towel to our competitors with their disastrous Default on America bill. I will keep saying this. China is not debating about whether to pay its debts or wreck its economy. China is not debating about whether to invest in its future or cut and cap the investments they need to keep it competitive. And China, by the way, does not operate on CRs. So why do House Republicans want to threaten economic catastrophe and put us behind? We cannot let partisan hostage-taking win the day and lose us in the 21st century. So I'm glad that Leader Schumer is bringing together this group of chairs to craft policies to keep our nation competitive, and I'll certainly be looking at what kind of investments it will take to support all of their efforts. I'm already talking to my colleagues on appropriations about what kind of investments make sense, whether it's in R&D, strategic partnerships abroad, or in other areas similar to how we did with the CHIPS funding last Congress, which had widespread bipartisan support. But in addition to this new effort, I'm also focused on ensuring that we have a reliable and consistent annual appropriations process, meaning regular order and passing our funding bills in a timely way so we can strengthen American competitiveness and security. And we have to remember it is about more than just investing in our defense to ensure our success. After all, investing in child care is investing in the workforce that will build semiconductors here in America. Investing in clean energy is investing in American jobs. Investing in food safety or medical research or border security is protecting our families. And investing in American leadership across the board and across the world is how we win the future. And finally, I want to echo the sentiment of many of my colleagues and remind everyone, we are competing against the Chinese government, not the Chinese people or the Chinese Americans across our great country. With that, I will turn it over to Senator Stabenow.
Senator Stabenow is next.
Thank you. There are few areas where we have agreement, it seems like these days, but one area that we do agree on is ensuring that we compete successfully against the Chinese government on the global stage. We need to compete, and we can, and win this race. I'm particularly concerned as chair of the House or the Senate Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee about foreign control and influence over our nation's agricultural land and food security. The Chinese government's control over certain global food supplies should alarm everybody. As foreign entities attempt to acquire U.S. food and agricultural companies, American farmers and families deserve to know that these transactions will receive proper scrutiny. And that's why when a Chinese company bought Smithfield Foods, I worked with Senator Grassley to introduce a bipartisan bill, the Food Security as National Security Act. This bipartisan bill would add USDA and FDA as permanent members of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS. It would also add new criteria to ensure that we are considering the long-term impact of foreign acquisitions on American food and our agricultural systems. We have strong bipartisan support, and I look forward to working with Senator Schumer and all of our colleagues in the Senate to get this package done.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. And, you know, we believe when American workers are in a fair contest, they can outcompete anybody in the world. And Democrats are going to have their back as we go out in this new effort and put points on the board for American workers and American businesses as we outcompete China. And this doesn't have to be a partisan proposition. In 2021, when the big CHIPS bill was on the Senate floor, it was a bipartisan Senate Finance Committee trade title that went after China's trade cheating. And I've been consulting with Senator Crapo and Republicans on the Finance Committee. There's a lot of interest in resurrecting a number of those key provisions. And I'll just give you a couple and yield to my colleagues. For Democrats, we feel very strongly about toughening trade enforcement to protect American businesses and American jobs. We believe strongly in women's economic rights. Catherine Cortez Mastow's effort was a big, transformative one. Fighting censorship, the Great Firewall, protecting Americans' privacy are just a few. Republicans care about many of those issues as well, and we've already begun to discuss them. Senator Crapo and I have begun those talks. We believe the place to start in terms of fighting China's trade cheating is with the title that got a huge vote on the floor of the United States Senate when it came up in the CHIPS area, and we're going to keep building on that. Thank you, Leader Schumer.
91-4 that passed.
91-4.
Senator Reid.
China is a pacing threat, and we have to pick up our pace. We've done that with the CHIPS and Science Act. It has provided more security to our military-industrial base. It will continue to do that. It will also provide us the technologies we need to be competitive. This is a multi-dimensional confrontation involving technology, military strategy, diplomatic, and also it's involving coordination and cooperation with our allies. In the NDAA, years ago, we passed the Pacific Defense Initiative to try to bring all of our allies together. And we're looking at ways in which we can accelerate that combination of forces. We recently, the administration announced AUKUS, which will bring Australia, Great Britain, and the United States together to focus on submarine production, one of our most lethal and effective weapon systems in the Pacific. We also want to look very hard at the Quad, which is Japan, South Korea, India, the United States, and our other allies. We want to create a force structure which is combining all of our allies, being able to conduct operations and communication on an uninterrupted basis. In fact, telling the Chinese and showing the Chinese that they would be up against the world if they tried anything. And we will prevail.
Senator Carper and then Senator Menendez.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm privileged to chair the Environment and Public Works Committee of the United States Senate, along with Senator Shelley Capito, Republican from West Virginia. The last Congress, you'll recall, President Biden, under his leadership, President Biden enacted legislation, historic legislation, to do maybe three things. One, to rebuild our infrastructure. Number two, to position the United States as a global leader in the fight against climate change. Number three, to spur the creation of clean energy manufacturing jobs across our nations by the hundreds of thousands. And people have been paying attention. For the first time in years, a majority of American people actually believe that the United States is the world's top economic power. Still, as President Biden said during his State of the Union address earlier this speech, we need to finish the job and reduce our reliance on competitors like the Chinese government. As EPW chairman, I know of three policy areas where we already have bipartisan support. One is preserving and expanding our nation's use of clean, reliable nuclear energy. Last month, Senator Capito, Senator Whitehouse, and I led the introduction of something called the ADVANCE Act, which would help strengthen our nuclear supply chain infrastructure. Our bill would also support the export of American nuclear technologies and benefit our domestic industrial base. The second policy area is reauthorizing the U.S. Economic Development Administration, EDA. If we're going to compete economically with the Chinese government, we must do all we can to ensure that our local and regional economies have the resources they need to be successful. And the third policy area is strengthening our domestic recycling systems and help reduce our dependence on foreign materials. Senator Capito, Senator Bozeman, and I have already reported 2 bipartisan recycling bills out of the Environment and Public Works Committee just for that purpose. I oftentimes say that bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions, and competition against the Chinese government is something that should unite it all, and it does. Thank you.
Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Look, let me start with a few words on the MAGA Republican plan to default our debt as it relates to this issue. The United States defaulting on its debt would be the single greatest strategic gift to the Chinese Communist Party. The Defaulting on America Act is not a serious bill, but passed by a Republican majority in the House that would undermine the United States' ability to compete with China and advance other foreign policy objectives. We've made critical gains to ensure that the United States is once again at the forefront of confronting global challenges. But those hard-fought gains would be lost under the McCarthy bill, which would be the lowest funding level for U.S. diplomatic and development efforts in more than a decade and a half, gutting American global leadership. There's been never more critical time to fund our foreign policy budget, and the Chinese Communist Party has dramatically expanded its diplomatic footprint across the globe. They have more diplomatic posts around the world than any other country, including the United States. They are outpacing us in placing PRC nationals at all levels of the UN system, and they are advancing their economic goals through the Belt and Road and Digital Silk Road initiatives in the Western Hemisphere, in Africa, in the Middle East, and across Europe. So the impact of these budget cuts would be devastating and antithetical to everything that we're trying to do here. Let me briefly say what we need to stand up to Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party is to fund fully and engage our State Department. We need to be robustly abroad in the world. We need to use all of our development assistance in a combined, cohesive effort and leverage with other countries that are like-minded with us so that we can compete with China and its development assistance in the world. We need to have an economic statecraft plan. Part of our diplomacy has never been about economic statecraft. We need to do that. And lastly, we need to robustly lead what sets the standards in the world. These international institutions that ultimately set up standards in the world, we need to lead there and have allies who will follow us in order to set the standards that the United States will be able to excel in. These are all elements of what we see from a Senate Foreign Relations Committee effort. I've talked to Senator Risch. We've been working on a China bill, and I hope that we will come to a great conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership. Senator Cardin and Senator Shaheen.
First, let me thank Senator Schumer for bringing us all together. We have a challenge with China. We know that they're not playing by the rules of international engagement. We've got to be smarter, and I thank Senator Schumer for bringing us all together. We have a good track record. Under President Biden, Senator Schumer, the last Congress, we did pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the bipartisan chips and science bill. That gives us a foundation to move forward. I chair the Small Business Committee, and I thank you for including that. President Biden acknowledged this week that 40% of our GDP is created by small companies. It is critically important that we give them the ability to compete under these challenging times. I've been working with Senator Ernst to develop bipartisan legislation to help America's small businesses. We helped them during COVID-19, and they survived. Now they have to be able to deal with international global competition. That means stronger tools available to help them in the high-tech fields, in the manufacturing fields, and particularly dealing with the traditionally underserved communities so that we have our entire economy at full speed to deal with the competition we have from China. I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to presenting legislation that will help America's small businesses.
Senator Shaheen and then Senator Merkley.
Well, thank you, Senator Schumer. I'm pleased to join all of my colleagues here to basically reiterate what everyone has said, and that is that the pacing threat for the United States is the People's Republic of China, both militarily and economically, so both from our national security and from our domestic perspective. Last year, we made significant investments, and I'm proud that as chair of the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Subcommittee, I worked with my ranking member, Senator Moran, and we were able to get historic investments in the National Science Foundation, more money than ever for the National Science Foundation. We funded the CHIPS and Science legislation, authorized that legislation at record levels. And now we have to build on those investments so that we are positioned to compete against the PRC in the way that we need to. I just left a businessman who makes printed circuit boards in New Hampshire. And I asked him what he perceives as the competition. He said, well, you know, over 90% of so many of our electronics and chips, printed circuit boards, are made in Asia. If we're going to compete, we've got to do better. And the biggest threat he saw is default, because default would be catastrophic for the business community. So I'm pleased to be behind this effort, and we've got a lot of work to do in order to make sure we can compete.
Senator Merkley, followed by Senator Coombs.
The competition between the United States and China government is a competition between democracy and autocracy. The work of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, which is bipartisan, bicameral, has highlighted several issues in need of attention. One of those is strengthening enforcement of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. America must never tolerate slave labor or genocide, and certainly must block any products made under such conditions. Second, we have to intensify our efforts to end China's tactic of transnational repression, in which they threaten Americans or American residents directly, or threaten their families back in China, to suppress their ability to exercise their free speech here in America, to criticize China's policies or China's human rights record. And third, we must continue to block the export of equipment and supplies to the Hong Kong police. And I thank Senator Cornyn for partnership in this effort. Those police were certainly horrific in stripping the rights of the people of Hong Kong. Chinese government's high-tech autocracy poses a significant threat to our values and our freedoms, and we have to have a strong, multifaceted legislation to respond.
Senator Coombs, followed by Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Senator Schumer, for recognizing clearly that the challenge of this century is China, is the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party. The CHIPS and Science Act, which Senator Schumer and Senator Young led here in the Senate last year, was truly landmark legislation and lays the foundation for reinvigorating advanced manufacturing here in the United States. But we need to finish the job. There were other great pieces of legislation across several committees that didn't get included, and there's more we're going to develop. Let me speak to three of them briefly that touch on areas that Senator Schumer laid out as being central to this opportunity for real bipartisanship. I chair the Intellectual Property Subcommittee of Judiciary. Senator Tillis is a great ranking member there, and we have a number of bills. I'll point to one with Senator Cornyn, the Secrets Act, which strengthens our tools to prevent the importation into the United States of products made with stolen intellectual property. Senator Schumer also talked about the Belt and Road Initiative. In many countries in the global south that I've visited, they've taken on Chinese debt to finance the construction of infrastructure that hasn't met their needs. We have a critical tool, the Development Finance Corporation, but it's under-resourced. And I look forward to working with my ranking member on the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee that funds DFC, MCC, the State Department, and all of our foreign assistance to fix a critical problem with the DFC, to give it more resources, more power, and more reach. Last, we know that China uses its economic power as a bully. It coerces smaller countries like Lithuania or large regional players like Australia that don't toe the line. Senator Young and I have introduced the Countering Economic Coercion Bill, one of many that Senator Schumer is going to lead us in pulling together into a significant bipartisan package. I'm excited to be a part of this initiative and look forward to working with all of my colleagues as we counter this most significant challenge of this century, the Chinese Communist Party. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Kuhn. Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Senator Schumer, for pulling us all together. First, the Chinese Communist Party is rooting for House Republicans to drag this country into default. This would be a gift-wrapped present to the Chinese Communist Party. Second, as chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security, we need to acknowledge that the most dangerous import from China into the United States is fentanyl. It is Chinese chemicals that are sent to Mexico, which end up in the transit of heroin and fentanyl to the United States, killing thousands of American citizens. We can make bipartisan new investments in interrupting that trade of fentanyl and precursor ending up in the United States. And third, let me just back up what both Senator Menendez and Senator Kuhn said. We are often fighting China around the world with one hand tied behind our back. We need dramatically increased investments when it comes to fighting Chinese propaganda and misinformation, as well as their economic statecraft. We have had bipartisan support for the Global Engagement Center. That's where the State Department goes out and corrects false narratives that are proffered by China around the world. There remains solid bipartisan support to fight that war against misinformation throughout the region that China is trying to move into. So thank you, Senator Schumer, for bringing us all together around this bipartisan effort.
Someone who deserves specific and large accolades is Senator Peters. He was last on the list, not through any fault of his own, and he stayed the whole time. So please pay careful attention to Senator Peters.
Well, thank you, Leader Schumer, because I'm proud to be part of this group. Thank you for including me. As chairman of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, I'm focused on making sure that we can keep our nation safe from a range of security threats, as well as strengthen our economic competitiveness. We know that cyber attacks with ties from the Chinese government are relentlessly trying to infiltrate our networks and steal sensitive information. Last Congress, I led bipartisan legislation to better protect our critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. But we need to build on that work. We need passed legislation that we passed out of the Senate, but need to get through all the way to update the Federal Information Security Management Act to better secure our federal government systems. We also need to address cyber attacks that pose a real risk to our economic prosperity as hackers steal intellectual property and continue to work to protect those assets. Also, we'll work with Senator Murphy on the fentanyl issue. We are focused on that, particularly on increased staffing and non-intrusive screening capabilities at our ports of entry, as well as ones that may transit our ports and then come back through Mexico and other places. I'm also concerned with the shortages of critical medicines and our over-reliance on foreign manufacturers, particularly those run by the Chinese government. I've been investigating this national security concern since 2019 and have released 2 reports with key recommendations to address it, including increased transparency of our medical supply chain and where these medications and raw materials are actually coming from so we can address this national security threat. We will also focus on encouraging more advanced manufacturing and domestic production of certain generic medicines so that they both address the risk of relying on foreign suppliers as well as boosting jobs here in the United States.
Thank you, Gary. And one final point, I have used the word, and most of my colleagues, Chinese government, Xi regime. We want to separate that from both the people of China and the great Chinese American community here. And so that's why we have used that terminology. Yes. We'll do it on this subject first.
As you know, Republicans will want to prioritize China in the context of the military and defense. How much of a priority will that be?
Well, that, as you saw, of our 5 pieces, 2 are related to the military, the foreign policy and defense aspects. That is necessary but not sufficient. We have to deal with that issue, but we also have to deal with the economic issue because we're in a large, very important, very crucial competition with the Chinese government. Both are important, both.
But both Republicans and Democrats have raised concerns about Chinese-affiliated companies buying up huge swaths of American Is that something that
Yes.
you are concerned about?
Senator Tester has been a leader on this. I've talked to him, and that Senator Stabenow goes into the agriculture bill, and she's involved in that as well. That's bipartisan, and we hope to get good support on it.
Leader
Yes.
Schumer.
Hi. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the opportunities in this bill to specifically tackle the climate crisis, given that there's a lot of criticism about relying too much on Chinese products that require more carbon intensity and emissions than what is produced in the United States.
Yeah, the bottom line is that China has been a net polluter. They're still building coal plants. And this is one of the things we're going to look at, not only making sure that the United States moves in a strong direction in terms of green power, but also making sure that other countries who are not moving in that direction can't just move forward on their own. Yes.
Senator Schumer, Basil John, next start. So with this next step that you and Democrats are pushing for, is there a timeline that you guys have for you and your colleagues' expectations? Did you expect to have some larger China bill before the end of Congress? How essential is it to get Republicans not just on board, but also helping work on that?
Well, again, as I said, we want this to be bipartisan. The initial reaction has been excellent. I've talked to a number of senators, like Senator Young and Senator Cornyn, who have cared a lot about this. My colleagues have been talking to their ranking members and getting a good reaction. And I know you may be skeptical, but look at Chips and Science. It was a great bipartisan effort. It really helped America move forward in our competition with the Chinese government, and it's a model that we're using to move forward. We hope to get a bill, you know, within the next several months if we can do it. It's a big undertaking, but that's what we hope to do. Yes.
Chips and Science, but the political dynamic has changed. House Republicans are focused on spending cuts, spending increases. How does that change?
Well, I think that's one of the many reasons that we think that this stuff, is what you can call it, is certainly not a plan, that's come over from the House is bad. It would weaken our competition with China and the Chinese government, because it eliminates a lot of the things in Chips and Science, in job production, in terms of the IRA, even in terms of the BIF.
Leader Schumer.
Yes. No, we're going to step
Leader
on this
Schumer.
subject. Yes. Yeah, this is one of the things that we will look at for sure. Senator Warner has some bipartisan legislation on this, and that would be something that we would look at, definitely.
Leader Schumer.
Will this package address critical minerals?
Absolutely. Critical minerals is a very important part of this package. Senator Manchin has talked about that. Senator Stabenow has talked about that. Yes.
And
yes.
on that point, with regards to renewable energy, specifically with regards to the solar panel industry, China dominates that market, and some, even within your own party, have said that their American manufacturers of solar panels are forced to compete with cheap forced labor from China, and you're voting this afternoon on a bill to reinstate those tariffs that Biden waived. Do you think it was a mistake for Biden to waive those tariffs?
No, the 2 years, look, either way, whether there's a 2-year extension or not, the chip manufacturing and battery manufacturing is flocking to the United States because of the Buy America provisions. They are very strong. Companies are opening up. Tens of billions of dollars have been invested. Thank you, everybody.
Senator Feinstein, can you give us an update?
Just quickly, we'll give a quick...
Can you give us an update on Senator Feinstein for the microphones?
Sure. I talked to Senator Feinstein a few days ago, and we're both hopeful that she can come back next week. 1, 2, and that's it.
So on the debt ceiling, you have the hearing tomorrow. I know you guys have a lot of problems with the Republican bill. You're going to fillet that bill tomorrow. But just the fact that you're having a hearing on that bill, doesn't that give Republicans the opportunity to emphasize their argument? This is the only bill that has passed.
Well, it'll be the first opportunity Republicans have ever had to emphasize it, because despite what McCarthy said when he opened up his Senate, his House, that they were going to have hearings, they were going to have amendments, they were going to have discussion. This bill is so bad that they're afraid to do that. We're doing that for them. We welcome and relish the discussion in committee tomorrow.
But Senator McConnell just this morning is chiding you for having passed nothing in the Senate. Why not hold a vote and show the expected GOP opposition?
I have, as you know, I have Rule 14, an extension, a 2-year extension of the debt ceiling to December 31st, 2024. We're going to have our meeting on the 9th, and we'll see the best course of action after that.
Senator, question on
Thank
China.
you, everybody.
Thank you.